Welcome to our video looking at the Year 10 mock exam. Aim of this video is to talk you through the mock exam paper for the higher tier and to give you some pointers about what you could do to get full marks. As you're going through this video, it's important that what you do is with your purple pens, don't just fill in the sort of answers so that you get full marks, and you can see how many marks you should be getting by looking in the number of marks here, but use the answers, and once you've actually got full marks, put down some other comments. What else could you include? Now, the way it's set out is that normally you'll have the exam question, you'll have the actual mark scheme, and any resources that go with it. So you should be able to use this to confidently go through and make sure you see where you've gone wrong. One of the good things about using a video is that you can pause it at any time and you can replay. So make sure you use that function as we go through. So we'll start with the first question and we'll work through them one by one. So to start off with, question 2A, most people got this right. But really important here that what you do is you read the key terms. It's asking for you to name, describe, and it also mentions one process, and the key word here is erosion. So if you talked about weathering, some people talk about freeze-fall, for example. Some people talked about longshore drift and transport. Some people talked about erosion in general. You're not going to get any marks. And quite simply, the answers are down here. You got 1 mark for each of the words in bold, that'd be hydraulic action, and you got 1 mark for the explanation. So this is when waves force the air into cracks or the force of water hitting the cliff. Another mark for using the word abrasion, and another mark for explaining that's where waves are throwing material against the cliff or where the sediment in the waves grind or scrape against the cliff. Another mark for attrition, and that's basically when they bang into each other and are broken down, become rounded and smoother and smaller, sorry. And finally, 1 mark for mentioning corrosion and talking about the dissolving of material. So 1 mark for the term, 1 mark for the explanation. Now, question B wasn't always answered very well. Let's have a look at the question, see if we can unpick it again. So first of all, really important to look at the command word. The command word is describe. Quite a few people try to explain. That comes into a later question. Next, it's the distribution of counties, and we're looking at where the total value of building risk from coastal erosion is more than 3 billion. Okay, so we've unpicked the question. We know it's a describe question. There shouldn't be any because or anything like that in there. We know we're looking at counties and we want over 3 billion. Well, if we have a look over here, we can see that over 3 billion is the largest circles. Now, the best piece of advice I can give on a question like this is put your finger on the large circles or whatever colour, it might be coloured red or whatever it is on the map. Actually physically trace your finger over it. And if you do that, you put your finger there and you put your finger there. The first thing you notice is that there are 2 clumps, okay? And in fact, if you look at the mark scheme, the first mark is for actually recognising that. So there are 2 groups of counties with over 3 billion. Then you just got to simply say where they are. Well, these are kind of, what would you say, central, maybe northwest, and in fact, if you have a look, what you'll see is that pretty much any description will get you a mark. Central area, middle, west, north, northwest, anything that vaguely describes that gets you your 2nd mark. They've given you the names of the counties, so you can bet your bottom dollars another mark for naming some of them. Now, for this question, it's probably worth making this a general rule, always include at least 2. So, to get another mark up here, you need to mention 2 of those, of Marin, San Francisco, San Mateo or St. Cruz. That would get you 3 marks. But there's also this cluster down here. So again, if you said there's a 2nd cluster in the south, or southwest, or even southeast, you get your 2nd mark. And then if you name both of them, you get your 2nd mark. Again, once you actually think about the technique, very simple, but it's testing technique rather than actual knowledge, this question. Question C, on the other hand, is asking you to explain. Again, if you try and unpick the question, what you'll see, the command word here is suggest. It's also a 4-mark question. Now you can guess from that basically there'll be 1 mark for each reason, 1 mark for each explanation. So we're looking for point, explain, point, explain. Now, it's about higher value of buildings at risk from coastal erosion. What that means is that there are, I suppose, 3 reasons why there'd be more value First of all, if the area is eroding quicker, that means that there's more at risk. If the value of the property that's being eroded is higher, that means there's more at risk. And finally, you could look at sort of protection. If it's really well protected, there'll be less at risk, and if there's no protection, there'll be loads of risk. And if you look at the mark scheme, that's more or less what they've actually picked out. So, first of all, you could have a reason that explains there'll be more erosion. More erosion might be because of softer rock, it might be to do with destructive waves, or it might even do with the climate and the weather and storms and fetch. Any reason, basically, which has got more erosion and an explanation gets you 2 marks. Secondly, you could talk about the actual value of the property. So, more expensive properties could be because of tourism, the beautiful landscape. It could be because there are more buildings on the coast, so the value of those properties goes up. It could be to do with higher population density, so more buildings at risk. Again, 1 mark for the reason, 1 mark for the explanation. You might also have the idea of sort of management, coastal protection. And again, you might have the reason where you're saying that there's very good coastal protection, therefore the value of risk goes down, or it could be there's no protection, or even some of you mentioned the sort of side effects of groins and terminal groin syndrome, that coastal management elsewhere is increasing the risk. Again, 1 mark for the reason, 1 mark for the explanation. Now, question D was a question that caused quite a few people problems, and there's some good technique here we can talk about that might help you in future. So first things first, have a look at the question. So the question says, study figure 4. It shows a coastal management plan, and it says, explain why this is sustainable. Now, it's worth remembering sustainable basically means good. Good in the short term, good in the long term. So we're looking for things that are good. We also perhaps need to have some sort of clues as to what we can talk about, and that's where a good exam technique comes in. Basically, look at the figure, and the key thing here is that examiners generally don't write things for no reason. And if you have a look, you can identify a few things. So you can identify beach replenishment area, new bike path, new car park, old car park as well, and that should give you some clues about what to talk about. Now, basically, 1 mark for each idea. If you develop it, you get a mark. Notice there's no credit for just saying what's there. What you have to do is say what they do. So, new bike path, new car park encourages more cyclists, so it creates jobs. Beach replenishment increases the size of the beach. Okay, good. That means it's more of a natural defence, so it reduces erosion. Beach replenishment creates new environments for wildlife, so increases biodiversity. Or you could even have beach replenishment creates a larger beach, encourages more tourism. You could talk about the sort of beach replenishment, the advantages of that. So it's cheap, so it saves money, don't get into debt. Cheap to maintain, makes the area more attractive, it's natural, doesn't use up non-renewable resources, doesn't increase erosion elsewhere. Any of those would have got you 1 mark, and if you developed it, you get an extra mark. So again, it's a really one of those questions where you get the technique right and you'll be fine. Okay, now question E is fairly straightforward. It's basically asking you to talk about another sea defence method other than beach replenishment. What makes this a little bit tricky is it's 4 marks. And that means that you obviously need to write a little bit more than perhaps you might think is normal. However, if you have a look, it does say describe 1 method and explain. And that gives you a clue. So we're looking for 2 marks for describe and 2 marks for explain. And then basically, if you look down here, what you'll see, you've got the answers. So you could have gabions, okay, large boulders, rip-rap, rock armour, that type of things. Again, describe it, 1 or 2 marks, then you need to explain it. You have seawall, again, 1 mark for describing, 1 mark for explaining. Offshore breakwaters, we haven't really talked about that, but you can have that. Now, the most obvious one here is groins. And again, 2 marks would be groins, so wooden breakwaters, basically built into the sea at right angles to the cliff. And then the explanation is this traps beach material moved by longshore drift, or reduces longshore drift, that builds a protective beach. The beach then absorbs the waves and reduces erosion. One really important thing with groins is that it doesn't stop longshore drift. It traps material moved by it, it reduces it, but it doesn't stop it. So again, once you've actually got a clear idea what the question's after, fairly simple. 2 marks for explain, 2 to 3 marks for explanation. Now, the final question in this part of the exam is looking at river landform and process, and it's a 12-mark question. Now, one thing, it says name a river valley you've studied. Now, you've really got to know this is the River Tees, T-E-E-S. It then goes on to say, describe one landform and explain how natural processes may change this landform over time. You can draw a labelled diagram. It should include some freely developed ideas. Now, a labelled diagram would look something like this, okay, and it may well be that you can get most of the marks here. You do need, however, some PLC. So, for example, this top layer of hard resistant rock is the whinstone, W-H-I-N stone, and it's igneous and it's incredibly resistant to erosion. The relatively soft rock here is actually limestone, which actually is a relatively hard rock normally, but compared to the whinstone isn't. You then need to think about, well, what PLC? So it's about 20 metres high. It's the highest waterfall in Britain. It had about 30 cubics of water, that's cubic metres per second, pouring over the top of it. So you've got that sort of description. The next thing is to explain how natural processes may change this over time. The sort of thing we're looking for is, first of all, this idea of erosion here. Erosion to form the plunge pool. Now, in particular, it says natural processes. You should be talking about hydraulic action. Okay, so hydraulic action, basically the force of the water pushing air into cracks, causing the limestone to erode. You should also be thinking possibly about abrasion. They call it corrosion down here, but it means the same thing. And again, that's going to increase the size of the plunge pool. So there's a couple of marks there talking about that. As the plunge pool gets bigger, you've then got the undercutting into the softer rock. That in turn creates an overhang. The overhang will collapse, and that means that the waterfall will retreat to form a gorge. So again, it's a really nice question. One thing to consider though is if you are going to draw a diagram, do it really well. Make sure you've got really good labels. If you're not going to do it really well, don't bother. Okay, it's one of those things. There's no point doing a really rubbish diagram. It just takes you time. It doesn't get you any marks. A good quality diagram like this could actually get you nigh on 4 marks. So now we come to the economic development section of the exam, and it starts off with this question, and it's basically a data response question. So if we have a quick look, number 1, which country has an infant mortality rate of 26 per 1,000? So if you have a look, 26 per 1,000 is roughly about here somewhere, and has a life expectancy of 72 years. And again, 72 years takes you here. And if you have a look, what you can see is it's Turkey, which is number 9, which is just there and there. So most simple, most people got that. Describe different relationships shown between the GDP per person and 2 indicators. Now, it's really important you're doing GDP in the 2 indicators, not the 2 indicators themselves. And basically what we see is that infant mortality declines as GDP goes up, so it's a negative correlation, whereas life expectancy goes up as GDP goes up. It's a positive correlation. Again, you don't need to use those terms, but you can see down here you have to be explicit and at the bottom of the links are. Question 3 is basically getting an explain question. And again, it's a nice simple explain question. It's 4 marks, but there's 2 of them. So really what we're after is what's the point, what's the explanation, or even, as you'll see here, you can actually have 4 marks. So basically what it wants to know is why will life expectancy increase, why will infant mortality increase? And if you have a look down here, you can see all the types of things. So better healthcare, medical care, more hospitals, better doctors, more medicines, better access to operations, vaccines, immunisation. Basically, one of the mistakes to make is don't just say better healthcare. Better healthcare gets you 1 mark. You can pick out 2 or 3 of these things, and that will get you extra marks. Trouble is that you only get 3 marks in total for talking about medical care. The other thing then is what's making people get ill, if that makes sense. So as GDP increases, access to safe water will increase. Diet will improve. Notice people don't necessarily starve, but less prone to malnutrition. better education about healthy living, hygiene, things like that, better care for old people, pensions, more taxes paid, so therefore there's more money going into hospitals. So again, don't just talk about healthcare, talk about wider issues as well. Question B was one that people generally got 2 or 3 marks on, but very few people got 4 marks. Again, if you have a look at it, it's a 4-mark question. Explain how improvement, and it's going to be one of those questions where actually, yes, you're going to get marks for developing, okay, but also you can just put down lots of ideas. Now, it says improvement in level of literacy. Now, interestingly, just saying better education, better quality of life doesn't get you any marks. You've got to explain why. And what most people said was, if you have better literacy, you can get a better job. But what you then have to do is develop that. So what? Better job means higher pay. Higher pay means you've got more money to spend on food, education, clothes, etc. And it also means that, for example, that as literacy improves, more people are earning more money, they're paying tax. That's going to fund healthcare, further education. Now, the idea of work probably gets you 2 to 3 marks. You need, again, to think about other things. So, for example, you might talk about self-belief. You might talk about how it can improve farming. Again, if you can read fertiliser instructions, things like that, you're going to improve the amount of food. If you can read, then you've got access to contraception, family planning. And again, if women can read, they can teach their children, and that will improve their quality of life, particularly in the long term. So again, here, the best thing to think about is, well, I've done the obvious marks, where do I go next? And if you can think about some of the sort of other impacts, then you'll get 4 marks. Question C is actually quite a strange one, really. It's asking you to have a look at these 2 models and to basically say what's the best one. And what makes it quite challenging is you're asked then to give 2 reasons to support your choice. Now again, this is where technique comes in. Just almost say what you can see. So if we take this one up here, what can we see? Well, it shows how countries change over time. Well, that's one advantage. And it's got 1, 2, 3, 4 different types of countries. So again, it's got more types and it shows change. If we have a look over here, then actually what we see is a map. Therefore, it's showing the global distribution and it's showing how they're sort of divided, this idea of a north-south divide. So again, the secret here is not to overthink and just basically say what you can see. And again, simple bit of technique, but do that, you get your marks. Now, question D is one of those questions examiners seem to like. They love asking about disadvantages of long-term aid. Just be aware, it is long-term aid, not emergency aid. So you have to be careful you don't end up talking about how it only creates a short-term fix. Basically, it's 3 or 4 ideas here. First of all, you might want to talk about aid dependency. So basically, people start to become dependent on it, and then if it's removed, they struggle, or it actually stops people farming, things like that. You may want to talk about tied aid. So the fact that the donor basically insists on conditions, such as buying arms from the donor, and that means that the donor may benefit more than the recipient. There are other things that you may want to pick out. It may not reach the people who need it. That might be due to corruption, or it might be that it gets concentrated in the sort of capital, for example. It might be that it's these large capital projects, things like huge dams, which may actually flood local houses rather than help them. It might well be that it takes a long time to be effective. It might be it's given as a loan and just increasing the debt. But I think the 3 big ones here are dependency, tied aid and corruption. And if you can remember 2 or 3 of those, you'll be absolutely fine in the exam. Now, the final question, again, is a 12-mark question. And again, you have to look, first of all, name the LEDC and aid project. So you needed to say water aid in Tanzania here. Simply saying Africa really isn't good enough. So you need to know the locations of your projects. And ideally, you need to know it's in Kolo village. It then goes on to say, describe the main features of the aid project, explain how sustainable the project is. So again, you need to know some facts here. Well, what were the main features? Well, they built 6 taps in the village, and that was connected to a local river from a 6-mile pipeline. They also provided filtering so that the water was relatively safe. They educated locals in hygiene, and the total cost was approximately £15 per person in the village, so relatively cheap for a long-term solution. So your first paragraph really should be describing the key features of it. It then goes on to say how sustainable the project is. And we really want 3 developed ideas. So let's have a think about this. Well, the most obvious one is that locals were taught how to fix the pump. So that means that if the pump breaks, they can fix it, which means that it can work in the long term. The second point, a small charge of water was made. Now, that's really important for 2 reasons. One, it stops the water being wasted because you're paying for it. So that means that you're less likely to run out of water and you're more likely to manage your supply. It also means that you've then got money, which means that if it does need to be fixed, you've got the money to do it. Another key feature here is that it's taken something that took 5 hours to go and collect water each day to 5 minutes. So there's a massive reduction in time used to collect water. And then that can be used for children and go to school. For the women who used to collect it, they can also get educated, or they can set up businesses. That actually increases the amount of income and makes the area wealthier. The other benefit here is improved health. So less people are ill, children are going to school, they're getting better qualifications, people are going to work, they're earning more money. And also, because the health and the water is much improved, you're more likely to attract sort of key workers like doctors or nurses into the village, and that again is going to have long-term benefits. So actually this is a just know your stuff question, and if you know it, 1 paragraph on here, and then for each of these 3 points I would do a mini paragraph explaining using that sustainable, talking about long-term benefits. And if you do that, then actually if you look, you're going to hit this and there's no reason why you can't get 4 marks. Right, well that's the end of this video. What I suggest you do is you go back through, make sure that you've used your purple pens, that you've got all the answers done. Don't just stop on putting the minimum down, try and get as much detail as you can. If there's still any questions you're not sure about, if you flag them up, we can talk about them in lessons. Right, well thank you so much, I hope this has been useful, and good luck on improving it.